tightly tied together very often. Since I've had my law firm in Naperville for these 20 years or so, I feel like I have a little laboratory going, a little social laboratory going on what's going on out there. By definition, people come and see me because something has happened, something bad has happened to them or to their spouse or their kids. They've lost a job, their water or air or soil has been polluted. Or they find out, I'll talk to you a little bit more about this later, but in a typical environmental contamination case we do, not only do they find out that their environment is polluted and dangerous, but they also find out that the polluter and often the government knew about it for the last 20 years and didn't bother to tell them. So probably on the order of 200 to 300 human beings every year come into my office and say what's happening to them. It is more than fair to say that over the course of those 20 years, and particularly I would say over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there's been a very noticeable shift in the mindset of the people I'm talking to, who come in asking for help, and some of whom I can help, and some of whom I just can't, because sometimes they just have problems that the legal system isn't really designed to fix. So here's what I see. Well, I guess I'd say it this way. When I think about what our biggest problems are as a society, and God has got them, right? Terrorism, the Tea Party, and well, you guys will be the judge of what the order should be. The lack of health care for so many people, what's happening to our education system. I mean, we'd all have our own top 10 list, and it's awful, and it's getting worse. But I think even worse than all of that is the mindset that says the good things this country has to offer aren't for me and aren't for my kids. And it is no longer a concern, a worry. It's a certainty now for many people. They're past the point of wondering. They have concluded and fixed their minds that this game is rigged against me. When and what I'm seeing in my little law office laboratory is confirmed by all of the honest studies and surveys and polls that you see out there. And so what concerns me about it as a lawyer, as a husband, as a dad, as a citizen is the basic promise that holds us all together as a society is unraveled. And in some areas of the country, very, very quickly. The promise that says, I will help you out. It's if any of you are Springsteen fans, it's captured in a song called "We Take Care of Our Own." The basic promise of America. If you're in trouble, I will help you. Government will help you. The courts will be open to you to come and talk about what your problem is. You will stand on equal footing with the most powerful before the eyes of the law. Bullshit. Sorry, but truth, right? We're talking about the truth. That is the truth. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And what's different now is people are onto it. They know it. They know it. And so some of the kinds of behavior we see, ranging from crime, even to the way of the kind of posts you see on the blogs, some awful, vile things, I think, is an outgrowth of this, I don't feel responsible for you. And as I say, I think it's getting worse. Now, so what's that all got to do with the legal system? Because I think one of the basic promises that has held us together is the belief, not always well-founded, but the belief that if someone mistreats me in this country, I can do something about it. there are laws there are regulations there to protect me, there are people in place to enforce these, there is justice that can be done. There's a courtroom and a judge and a jury for me. That's what people believe. What I have found in practice, in the world I'm living in, is that it's very far from the truth. The sad truth is, the reality is that not only is government, including the court system, oftentimes indifferent, uncaring about the people that they are in place to help and to protect, but as often as not, hostile to them. Beyond indifferent, hostile. Yeah? Diane was kind enough to talk about a case, a couple of you may know of it as the Lockformer case. It's the Lockformer plant on Ogden Avenue in Lyle. I grew up less than a mile from there. And when I was a young kid, I was back there, knocked on their door and asked if they would pay me to cut their lawn. And they really should have hired me.
That's right.
To cut their lawn, things might have worked out. So since then, that was the first case that I did and my firm did, where we worked on behalf of homeowners whose, in this case it was their water supply, that had been contaminated, starting with industrial dumping back decades ago. And it seems such an extraordinary case to me, such an unusual case, and what I found in the 12 years since is that it's actually a very typical case, especially in the industrial Midwest. Companies in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s dumped all kinds of awful stuff into the ground. It bleeds down through the ground. It gets in through the soil and it gets into the groundwater, and then it goes where it goes. And if human beings, as many are in the Midwest, are dependent upon the cleanliness and the safety of that water, they're in trouble. And so here's what I've seen happening over the last 12 years. People find out, they get a letter or a knock on the door from somebody that says, hey, your water supply is contaminated. And then more and more is revealed over the months and years. And this, now what I'm about to describe to you is typical. Okay? The dumping that caused the contamination, the dumping of the carcinogens, which are now in the people's water, and which they have been using to bathe their kids at night and prepare food and drink. The carcinogen in that water started getting dumped by the company up the road 75 years ago. Government found out about it 25 to 30 years ago. Government found out it was in the drinking water 20 years ago. The polluter knew about it at least 20 years ago. Government and the polluter have been working together for the last 20 years. Government has been accepting the polluter's characterization of how serious or unserious the problem is. And because government accepted the polluter's characterization of how unserious the problem is, government not only didn't do anything about it, didn't require the company to clean it up, but nobody told the people. And so in one case, there's a young woman in Downers Grove, she grew up in Downers Grove, named Janet Bendick. We had a case for Janet Bendick. She, for years, showered in this water. PCE and TCE are tasteless, colorless, odorless, so you can be getting an awful dose of it and you don't know it. It's in the drinking water in her family's home. Her mom is preparing food and, washing the meat and everything else in this. She took baths in it. It was everywhere in the house. So Janet contracts, when she's 19 years old, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because of this. We get involved in the case, and what we find out is Janet was exposed to this chemical for 15 years while government reports were sitting on the desk of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency that said dangerous levels of this carcinogen was not only in the public water supply, but was in the water coming into Janet's home. And they never told anybody about it. Not only did they not say to the polluter, they knew who it was, they knew it was of some combination of a handful of companies. Not only did they not tell these companies clean it up, they didn't even tell Jana and her family enough so they could protect themselves, move someplace else, get a filter, use the water less, something. They didn't even get to protect themselves. Now, taking that case to court, you would think, would be more or less of a slam dunk given everything I've told you. It's not. We had to fight for years as these companies availed themselves of every legal strategy possible to delay what they knew was inevitable, which is they were going to have to compensate Jana as much as money will allow, which is not much, when you've devastated somebody's life like that, and ultimately they did, 4 years later. So let's just drop a footnote here. We have been inundated as a society with the claims of big business about how packed the courts are with frivolous lawsuits.
Frivolous ones.
And I will say, as somebody who files lawsuits, I will say there are some frivolous lawsuits. And I will say that when they get filed, they should be dealt with very harshly. But what you never hear talked about is the frivolous defenses. All right? And that is a far bigger problem. Because people like Jana Bendick, who need the medical care, because very wealthy companies have made her very ill, and they know they're going to have to pay, all right? But they and their insurers, who make a lot of money by keeping Jana's money in their pockets for years, and so they delay and they obfuscate, and the worst of them lie to keep from having to pay. And some of them get away with never paying. And even those who do pay oftentimes pay years later than they should, and there's no penalty for it. Frivolous defenses. A woman named Tony came to our office one day. Tony is one of God's people. Just a marvelous human being, a wonderful woman. She comes to our office, and the very long story boils down this way. She and her husband have been foster parents for years to some really, really troubled kids. Some kids with developmental disabilities, terrible emotional problems, and all the stuff that tends to run in a pack with it. Drugs and criminality and antisocial behavior. And the worst, and the kind of kids that our society is so used to just kicking to the curb and hoping some garbage truck will pick them up. Tony welcomes these kids into her family. She adopts one by the name of Daniel. Okay. Daniel is told by all of his doctors that his complex of emotional issues are so serious that he needs care round the clock in a residential treatment facility. Now, Daniel, because of his family circumstances and his own, is a Medicaid patient. Which some of you, maybe all of you know that that's a program 50% funded by the federal government and 50% by the state government, right? So what happens is the family makes application to the state and says, look, all the doctors agree we need residential care, we need Medicaid to pay for it. All right, the state of Illinois is broke. Rather than say, you know what, we're broke, we'll do the best we can. What they say to Daniel's parents, Tony and her husband, is they say, look, the way the law works is this. We can't get your son, Daniel, the residential care he needs. However, if you abandon him, I'm not kidding, if you abandon him under those circumstances, then we can maybe get him the help he needs. So you imagine, now, we'll just stop right there for a second, okay? You imagine, probably many of you, if not all of you, are parents here. There was a young man here at the back when we got going. You imagine as a parent being put in that situation. You want to help your kid, abandon him. How about that? So after a lot of anguish, Tony and her husband decided, we have to do this. So they abandoned him in precisely the way the state officials said to abandon him. You know what the state did? Prosecuted them for child abandonment. Your state and my state. Right? And by the way, this isn't because the state had some vendetta against this family, okay? This is the state's MO. This is your state and my state's MO because they're so broke, okay? Rather than deal forthrightly with people and say, look, here's what we can afford and here's what we can't, okay? And then, of course, incur the wrath of the federal government, who is paying half the bill for Medicaid patients. They do dishonest things like that. So long story short, Daniel is today doing extremely well. Daniel is an advocate for people who, for young people who are in the fix that he was in. Daniel is one of the lucky ones. We got involved in the case, and to make a very long story very short, we fixed this thing right away. The prosecution got dropped, and the state paid for what it was supposed to pay for. Why? Because Daniel had a lawyer. I'm not bragging here. In fact, I'm making the opposite point. I'm not doing a commercial for my firm. I'm saying something awful about our state. Daniel had to have a lawyer who threatened to come in and dismantle state government if they weren't going to give this young man his rights guaranteed, his civil rights guaranteed under federal law, guaranteed under the Constitution. All right? His parents were being prosecuted for child abandonment because they did what the state told them to do. So when I say the state is sometimes indifferent and as often as not hostile to the very people it's supposed to protect, I'm talking about situations like Daniel. And by the way, you won't be surprised to hear that this is not unique to Illinois. I mean, we're getting calls from all over the country now. I mean, the state of Kentucky, my God. Yeah, I mean, it's awful what's happening there. It's awful. I mean, what they have done in the state of Kentucky is they have outsourced, privatized the business of making these decisions and put it in the hands of a firm who their basic function in life seems to be to write letters to say no to families and children that need help. Yeah. Several years ago, I think it's about 4 or 5 now, I represent a couple of wonderful people named Jeff and Sarah who had the temerity one day, in their anguish over the Iraq War and how we got into it and how many lives we were losing over it, had the temerity one day to exercise their First Amendment rights by spray painting on a bedsheet, "Stop the Iraq War," and holding it up over I-355. And they had the really bad fortune that day of running into some DuPage County Sheriff's Police who had a different view about the wisdom of the Iraq War. Jeff and Sarah were arrested and charged with 3 very serious crimes, would have landed them in jail for up to 3 years had they been convicted. Holding up a sign over 355 expressing your view about one of the most fundamental policy issues in this country is evidently a crime, according to some in the DuPage County Sheriff's Office. So we don't do criminal work, but we took the case because I couldn't resist the case because I couldn't, well, Jeff and Sarah couldn't afford a lawyer, so we took the case. And so one day I'm talking to the prosecutor and I'm saying, "Read what I've just said to you. This is a crime in DuPage County." She said, "Yes, when you hold up a sign with the purpose of diverting people's eyes from driving that is a dangerous..." I said, "Oh." So in other words, when your boss, the state's attorney, runs for re-election and rents out a billboard next to I-355, and if I divert my eyes away to make sure I got the spelling of his name right, then he's committed a crime too. Is that what we're saying here in DuPage County? That case got dismissed. But if you're Jeff and Sarah, for those 6 months before the case got dismissed, you have the hell scared out of you. Am I going to jail? What do I do? What do I tell people? Yes, this Constitution says this, I have a First Amendment right, but what does it mean? It didn't seem to mean very much for those first 6 months. Okay, because having a First Amendment right to say what you want to about a war this country is involved in, it doesn't just mean that you get acquitted and the charges get dropped. What it really means is the charges don't get brought in the first place. Isn't that what it's supposed to mean? Well, not everywhere, it turns out. Not everywhere. And so this is why the work that you do in passing petitions around and getting good people elected, it matters to people like Jeff and Sarah and to a lot of other people whose rights hang in the balance. Yeah. Because what I have learned from these cases, let me take one, I'm sorry. So 4 years ago, over in the Wheaton-Warrenville School District, some other citizens, like Jeff and Sarah, who had the temerity to hold a sign up, these guys had the temerity to file a Freedom of Information Act request of their school district. And they said, we would like to see the document, the contract, please, of the superintendent of schools. We would like to know how much money he's making. The school district said, sorry, that's confidential. That's what they said. So the people called us up. We went to DuPage County Court. And I thought, well, this is pretty, I mean, how much more public can a document get? How much you're paying the superintendent of schools, right? The trial judge says, no, that's confidential. The trial judge, oh, okay, well, here we go. So we go to the appellate court, and we win in the appellate court. And the school district, though, refuses to turn the document over and says, no, we're going to the Supreme Court, the Illinois Supreme Court. Now, the Illinois Supreme Court takes only the cases it wants to take. And so I figured, well, they would turn this down. And they would let stand the appellate court decision, which was favorable for us, have to turn it down. So to my shock, the Supreme Court says, no, we'd like to hear this case. I said, oh. All right, this is Illinois where everything is rigged. What's going on? Well, we get to the Supreme Court, and I don't know why they took the case, because every one of them, all 7 of them, you know, I'm giving an oral argument, and the first thing I did was I said, look, justices, first thing I want to say is I'm sorry that this case even got to you. I'm hoping you agree with me that this is a colossal waste of your time. Because I don't think this right of citizenship means very much here. If you can be compelled by your government to pay taxes, to pay the salary of this man, and you don't know what the salary is. Where are we? We won 7-0. And now and so when the case gets to the Supreme Court, it obviously has impact. The significance of a case like that, you won't be surprised to hear, it has impact beyond just that one case. It really becomes the law of the land. And that happened literally within weeks of when a tougher Freedom of Information Act was passed in the state of Illinois, which is still not perfect, but it's pretty good. And I am a huge believer. I'm Republican, Democrat, I don't care. Your government is your business. And you get to know what's going on. It all, in my mind, it all goes back to that saying, famous, attributed to Mark Twain, which is, support your country all the time. Support your government only when it deserves it, right? Because there's a difference, okay? We're paying for this government. We have a right to know how our money is being spent. And I'm shocked that in the state of Illinois, you have to take 3 years and bother the 7 justices of the Illinois Supreme Court to punctuate the point. But we did. All right. So, again, what bothers me, not just as a lawyer, but as a dad with 3 daughters, and those of you who have daughters know that there's a lot that bothers you about having daughters, or should if you're paying even modest attention. But if you're trying to raise kids in this society, if you care about how this society works, you have to care, and you have to be bothered by the way that the courthouse, getting access to the courthouse is today with very few exceptions for the privileged few. The first the environmental case that the Daily Herald was writing about, my client, my primary client there was a woman named Teresa LeClaire. And so I don't know if any of you have ever been into the federal courthouses up along, on Dearborn in Chicago. If you have been, I won't ask you why you've been to the federal courthouses in Chicago. But so the first day we get in for the trial, and I walk in the courtroom with Teresa, and she sort of stops in the doorway, and I walk on past her. I'm thinking about how I want the trial to go that day. And this courtroom is just this august wood panel. I mean, the judge is up there like Zeus up on high, you know. And it's just a magnificent room. And I'm at what they call the counsel's table where the lawyer sits, and I notice Teresa's still at the door, and I look back at her, and she's looking around like this, and there's tears in her eyes. And now understand, Teresa is, in the best sense of the word, a very simple and modest human being. She works hard. She doesn't expect a lot out of life. She earns every bit of what she gets. And here she is, Teresa LeClaire, against some of the largest companies in the country. And she and her two lawyers are up against a whole law school full of lawyers on the other side. And she's standing there and Teresa, what's going on? She thought, I never thought I would get here. Well, what do you mean? I didn't think this place was for me. I didn't think they would take me seriously. And isn't that it? Isn't that the point? When you talk about the promise of America, to me, very basically, it is the promise that you will be taken seriously. You want your kids to have a good education, right? You want them to be better off than you. You want a safe neighborhood. You want a place where you can have your grievances heard. You want to be able to know what your government is doing. You'd like your kids to be able to breathe the air and drink the water without dramatically increasing the risk that they're going to get cancer 10 or 15 or 20 years from now. You want to be taken seriously. Now, it's a great story that Teresa got to go up against Honeywell and those other big corporations and beat them. And beat them bad.
Yep, right.
And it's a great story that Daniel now, his life has been so magnificently turned around because he got the medical care that all his doctors said he needed, that now he's helping other people. These are wonderful stories. You know, but the risk in these stories is that they would get misinterpreted to say, look, what a wonderful country. Look, in a lot of ways it is a wonderful country, or there couldn't be stories like that. But those stories are not typical, and that's the problem. Okay, you shouldn't have to, and again, I'm not tooting my own horn here, I'm criticizing our society when I say you shouldn't have to have a lawyer behave heroically in order for you to just get what the Constitution says you're entitled to. Is that what it takes? Well, what does citizenship really mean then? What is the value of it if you have to have some lawyer risk his livelihood and his law? Teresa's case, I'd never done a case like that before, but it was, that case took, it's a kind of a case where we don't get paid unless we win. We're not sending Teresa a bill every month for tens of thousands of dollars. She would laugh, or she couldn't afford that. We only get paid if we win, if we get these big companies to pony up. So we were with that case for 2.5 years. 8,000 hours of lawyer time we spent that we weren't getting paid for. We paid for experts, for environmental studies, for all. We paid $1 million of our own money. The lawyers did. We didn't have it. I was borrowing money from my parents and my brothers and sisters, and it's a good thing we're from a big Irish Catholic family, or I don't know that I could have funded that case. That's what we had to do to get Teresa clean water. It's silly, and it's wrong. We have to find a better way. Part of the promise of this country is, if someone mistreats you, there will be someone who can do something about it, who will hear you out. A judge, a jury, whatever it may be. All of the laws we have, and God, we got laws that look good on paper, and we got regulations that look good. Yeah. In the state of Michigan, and and I know this because I was looking at an environmental case up there in Muskegon, Michigan. They got laws, they got books full of laws that would fill this room that are glorious in declaring how safe you're supposed to be from environmental contamination in the state of Michigan. Okay, except not too long ago, a governor defunded the Department of Environmental Quality. So we'll go to the laws. We'll go to the books. Yeah? They're no better than Aesop's fables for protecting you against what you really need to protect your children against. So, to me, the promise of America is nothing more complicated than we will take you seriously. We will take you seriously in your hopes and dreams for your kids, and your faith that if something bad happens to you, there will be a fair way that you can be heard. Not that you will win, necessarily. Certainly not that you will get millions of dollars for spilling a hot McDonald's coffee on your lap. All right? I'm not talking about jackpot justice. I'm not even talking about winning. I'm talking about something morally far more important than that, which is being heard, being taken seriously. All these people, I'll end where I began. These hundreds of people who come through my office every year, and basically, here's my grievance, Mr. Lawyer, can you help me? Well more than half, probably 75%, the ultimate answer is, after we do some investigation, looking at the legal precedent, the ultimate answer we unfortunately have to give these folks is we can't help you. Just because you've been hurt or you believe someone has done something wrong to you doesn't mean necessarily there's a legal solution. That's the sad truth of it. But one of the most surprising, and I have to say gratifying things about being a lawyer is how frequently after I look people in the eye and I say, sir, thanks for coming to see me about this. We've looked at it. I'm sorry, you don't have a case. Ma'am, I'm sorry, you don't have a case. And I feel bad for saying that because I know what they wanted to hear when they came to see me. So many times, those people are the most grateful human beings I have ever met. And they'll write me a note, and they'll say thank you because somebody listened to them. Somebody took them seriously. All right. Somebody said, at a very basic level, you matter. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, at least in the legal, that's what people want. It's amazing to me, I've written articles about this, it's amazing how many cases could be settled with an apology. Yeah. So many cases seem to be, in the popular lore, is it's about money, and some of them seem to be, and I do like getting paid, I have to say that. But enough about having 3 daughters, okay? Almost always, these cases, there's something more fundamental and important going on. There's something about the basic dignity of the human being involved who feels she's been wrong or he's been wrong that needs to be addressed. And not necessarily with money, but sometimes in a way more fundamental than that. So, next time I come I'd be happy to offer my thoughts. I mean, it would take a lot longer. But for another speech, I would say, I would offer you ideas about how as a society we can fix this. I think ultimately, we need a good economy that provides jobs and hope and education. And until we have that on a sustained basis, we're not, the legal system is going to be bailing water. It will never be able to fix this, but it still can be better. And there are ways for it to be better that are kind of beyond tonight's discussion. But anyway, as you're doing your important political work, just remember that the people you help put in office, and the people you help get out of office, are the ones who touch people's lives most directly, and who either fulfill or neglect the basic promise of our society that says, you're important and I will take you seriously today. Nice to be here.